The pollsters prevail as the UK Labour Party wins by a landslide. Widely predicted, it is the Conservatives' worst defeat on record. But does it mean Britain is embracing the left or just rejecting the Tories after 14 years? And how will Labour's huge majority shape the UK's influential foreign policy going forward? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the UK election. With 5 prime ministers in 8 years, Britain's Conservatives couldn't exactly brag about their party's stability. But to lose 250 seats while your opponents take a historic parliamentary majority is humiliating, to say the least. The man who called the snap election, outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, has taken responsibility and delivered a humbling apology.
I would like to say, first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all. But you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. To all the Conservative candidates and campaigners who worked tirelessly but without success, I am sorry that we could not deliver what your efforts deserved. It pains me to think how many good colleagues who contributed so much to their communities and our country will now no longer sit in the House of Commons.
And now Labour, under its leader, Keir Starmer, will head into Parliament with the power to effectively pass any legislation they see fit, no matter what their opponents may think.
We did it! You campaigned for it, you fought for it, you voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now. And it feels good, I have to be honest. 4.5 years of work changing the party. This is what it is for. A changed Labour Party, ready to serve our country, ready to restore Britain to the service of working people.
And it is the working people who need the most help. The UK economy is still struggling to recover from the effects of the COVID pandemic with its subsequent spike in inflation, plus the energy shock caused by the war in Ukraine. In fact, people are barely any better off in the UK than they were in 2007 before the global financial crash. Labour promises to produce the highest growth in the G7, but its hands are tied to an extent by a large budget deficit and public debt that's now equivalent to 100% of GDP. On top of that, there's a sense that public services are crumbling. Healthcare waiting lists have now swollen to over 7 million people, and many struggle to even get an appointment with a doctor. But on foreign policy, Labour's position isn't so far removed from the Conservatives, but there are some key differences. On the issue of immigration, Labour has pledged to scrap the contentious Conservative plan to have asylum seekers processed in Rwanda. Instead, they'll put more money into policing borders and prosecuting people smugglers. Both parties support Israel's so-called right to self-defense, but Keir Starmer has also pledged to recognize a Palestinian state. There's also support for the ICC's call to arrest certain Israeli leaders for war crimes. Regarding the war in Ukraine, there is very little discernible difference in Labour's policies. The UK is the 3rd largest donor to Ukraine behind the US and Germany, and that support will continue. And as for Europe, both parties steered clear of Brexit during the campaign. Labour has said they won't try to rejoin the EU, but they have proposed measures that will bring the UK and the EU closer. Well, Labour's manifesto promises a lot of extra spending on public services, but it's not clear where that money will come from, as there's been little mention of raising taxes. But finally, after years of stagnation, there are glimmers of hope. Inflation has finally stabilized, and while the UK's public debt is high, it's actually the 2nd lowest in the G7 after Germany. And more encouraging still, consumer debt, including mortgages, credit cards, and loans, is now roughly equal to savings for the first time in years. So people have the ability to spend. The question is, will 5 years of a Labour government encourage them to open their wallets and grow their economy?
I don't promise you it will be easy. Changing a country is not like flicking a switch. It's hard work, patient work, determined work. And we will have to get moving immediately. We said we would end the chaos, and we will. We said we would turn the page, and we have. Today we start the next chapter, begin the work of change, the mission of national renewal, and start to rebuild our country. Thank you. Thank you.
So how new a chapter will this be for the UK, and what's really set to change? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from London, political economist Will Hutton, from Birmingham, political activist and co-founder of the pro-EU advocacy group, Our Future, Our Choice, Femi Oluwole, and from Bournemouth, former advisor to former Prime Minister David Cameron, Peter Wilding. Thanks all so much for being with me. Will Hutton, I'll start with you. Why this win? And does it mean Britons are indeed embracing the values of the left, or just rejecting, the Tories and the political chaos that we've seen now over the last decade in UK politics?
Well, it was a massive repudiation of the British Tory party. Most Tories recognise that. It was their worst result ever, I think, in modern times. So that's the first thing to say. And what lay behind, I think, the Tory party's kind of difficulties in governing well were profound kind of mismatch within the party ideologically, and also, the kinds of things they wanted to do to the country didn't want to have done to it. So although it's not an embrace of the left, by default, it kind of is. Mr. Starmer is a centrist. He is a moderate. He is level-headed, but he proudly proclaims his working class values, and he is a man of the centre left. And I expect the government to be kind of much more kind of interventionist. I think it will kind of do stuff, raising public investment, trying to heal the wounds in British society. And I think it will have, and I think there will be some important implications for British foreign policy. I think we will become kind of lean more into Europe than we have been doing under the Conservative Party. But it's a massive repudiation of the Tory party. And in this sense, it's as big a moment as 1945 when Clem Attlee was elected for Labour, 1979 when Mrs Thatcher was elected for the Conservative Party, and 1997 when Tony Blair became elected. It's a turning of the page.
Okay. Peter Wilding, what do you have to say as a Conservative yourself? Where did it all go so wrong?
Well, I agree completely with Will. This is a repudiation of the Conservative Party post-2016, when the party of compassionate conservatism, the party that bought into the Blairite consensus, the party that bought into some of Will's blueprint, which he so eloquently set out in his book, The State We're In. But in 2016, the split in conservatism between those who wanted to play culture wars, hence Brexit, hence divisive splitting of society and cultural groups, took over. It's as simple as that. Brexit was a revolution, and Brexit was a coup within the Conservative family. And that experiment has most significantly failed. The question is, what next? And obviously, the Conservative Party is facing a real terrifying choice right now, because with Nigel Farage elected, the fox is in the henhouse, something the Conservative Party has sought to resist for a long, long time. And what happens now is that the next leader will be chosen by the membership, who have been flirting with Nigel Farage for nearly 20 years now. And the way I see it is that the one candidate, the old-fashioned one nation Conservatives are gone. There is really no home for them anymore, particularly as the members are bound to choose somebody like Robert Jenrick. And Robert Jenrick is on record of saying that he would not be averse to Nigel Farage being welcomed into the Conservative Party. So now we are facing a Trumpian direction, I think, Conservatives.
You know, Peter, I have to say, first and foremost, it's interesting to hear you say Brexit at the top of your analysis there, because, you know, watching a lot of the UK media and then those that are speaking right now post the result here, they don't want to talk about it. Nobody really wants to mention that Brexit was a fundamental issue in what happened to the Tory party over the last. And I know, Femi, you probably more than anyone will believe that Brexit has very much been underplayed in the effect that it's having, not just on the party, but on the entire UK.
Well, we just heard about how the Conservative Party, has abandoned its traditional conservative values, and it's become Trumpian. It's no longer about actually helping people. It's just about the cult of personality and culture wars, etc. And Brexit was the key to that. Like in 2019, Boris Johnson literally fired any Tory MP, Conservative MP, that wasn't willing to go for a no-deal Brexit. And no-deal Brexit means not having a trade deal with our neighbours. Now, given that there is no other major Western economy that doesn't have any trade deals with its neighbours, we are talking about doing something that every successful economy on the planet has chosen specifically not to do. So if you get rid of any MP that is not willing to completely destroy your economy, then you have essentially turned your party into extremists. That's what Brexit did.
And they have themselves to blame, you believe. But Femi, I mean, let's say you're certainly not disappointed to see the Conservatives defeated. But I have to ask you, how high are your expectations now for this Labour government going forward, even with this huge majority?
So this is why I'm very upset that Starmer chose to choose the strategy that he's taken over the last 4 years, i.e. basically pretending to be a conservative. He's said things like how he supports Israel, he's against, he's pushed back on the idea of wealth taxes, he's been in favor, he's supported Brexit. It ultimately means that if Starmer is going to do the things that most progressive people want him to do in terms of undoing Brexit in order to help with the cost of living crisis, in terms of supporting Palestine so that we're no longer complicit in genocide, in terms of dealing with the wealth tax in order to deal with the fact that the UK is one of the fourth most financially unequal country in Europe, then he effectively would become a liar. He would have to say, actually, the person I've been pretending to be for the last 4 years, that's not me, I'm actually going to help you. So that's what I would want him to do.
That's what you'd want him to do. Well, in other words, he could just be a typical politician. Will Hutton, do you think he'll risk, backtracking on what he said or not said, especially in this campaign, to make the tough decisions that would be more in line with Labour Party values?
Look, he's a Labour man. I know him well. And although I understand why Femi said what he said, I don't think it's going to be quite as bad as that. I do think that he will increase taxes on aspects of wealth. I'm looking for an increase in capital gains tax, which wasn't ruled out. I'm looking for an increase in inheritance tax, which wasn't ruled out. And I'm looking for reform of the system of residential property taxation, council tax, and all those areas. I think there will be a significant increase in the tax yield. On Europe, I understand. I'm a pro-European. I'm a Remainer. I'm alongside Femi. I think he's going to take a step-by-step approach to getting back to the European Union. It will start with the Defence Pact. It will start with a scheme for youth mobility. It will start with lots of warm words, actually, in the European summit, political summit that's being held in Britain in July, which he's hosting in Blenheim Palace near Oxford. So I'm expecting much more rapprochement with the European Union. I'm expecting there to be a relaxation of some of the very absurd spending cuts which have been so damaging to British society. I think there will be some taxation of wealth. And I think above all, Rachel Reeves, the new incoming Chancellor, will spend a lot of money on, one way or another, on public investment to trigger private investment. So I'm much more optimistic than Femi. And actually, here's the thing, and you can, both of you, all of you can laugh at me, but I'm expecting this government to be one of the most successful post-war governments that we've seen.
Okay, I was actually going to ask you, Will, I mean, you're optimistic, but how quickly can they make these changes, especially to improve the economy? Because the question is, will Britons be patient enough to wait for this great government that you're forecasting to be revealed?
Well, I think they can begin. There's some of the institutions they need to kind of really activate have been left to them by the Conservative Party, actually. There's an infrastructure bank, which is tiny, which can be scaled up vastly. There's a business bank that can be scaled up vastly. There's consolidation of pension funds in both the public and the private sector that can be scaled up, and that money can be put to kind of really great good use. There's some borrowing potentially on the capital markets to support investment, research and development. All that can be kind of like now, actually, and I think it will. I think some of the things that I'm expecting will happen in the next 100 days and follow through in the next financial year. Obviously, there are risks. Obviously, there are, I mean, I've got my eyes wide open. I'm not a complete Bambi but I do think that he's got, and there's also some momentum in the upward momentum in the economy in its own right. There is some recovery coming through, which can be.
I just need to come back to Femi then quickly to ask about that, because I mean, one of your biggest gripes with the economy is the inequality that's developed. The UK it's the 6th biggest economy on the planet, but as you say, it's the 4th most unequal in Europe. So is that going to be the measure by which you decide if Keir Starmer is a good leader, if the Labour Party can be successful?
Yeah, that's going to be a huge metric, especially because we are dealing with the rise of the far right across Europe, and their entire narrative is that these elites in power don't care about you. And so if Keir Starmer allows the extreme inequality that we have in the UK to persist, then he's going to be leaving an open goal for people like Nigel Farage come 2029. Now, regarding the speed at which he does things like this, I think there's nothing stopping him, because the excuses of, oh, we've got to tread lightly in case the Daily Mail and the right-wing press come at us, in case the Tories use it as an attack line, so we have to avoid scaring off voters. All those excuses are gone. He has one of the hugest majorities in history. If he wants to say, I will rejoin the EU single market and I will completely get rid of all the trade barriers that Brexit has created, that will be a huge boost for business immediately. That will massively increase business confidence in the UK, investment confidence in the UK. It would send the pound up through the roof, undoing the damage of years of Brexit uncertainty. If he said it clearly from day one, not little bits of rapprochement and warm words, saying, I will do this. And then given that the EU offered a single market membership, well, in effect, single market membership from day one in 2017, that is something that is realistically on the table that would improve people's quality of life. He can do it. The choice not to is worrying.
Okay. So we'll have to wait and see where he goes on that front. But Peter, let me come back to you. And if you don't mind, I'd like to look at where this Labour Party government could take foreign policy. We mentioned at the top of the show that there are some differences that could prove controversial, let's put it that way. Not least Keir Starmer saying he will recognize not just a Palestinian state, but the fact that he's not very friendly with Benjamin Netanyahu. Gaza, for example, has proven a very divisive issue in the United States. Where do you see that going in the UK?
Well, it's proved a very divisive issue only last night, plainly. The loss of several Labour MPs and their seats due to the Gaza issue was striking, I thought. And it presages trouble ahead. I agree with Will. Well, I suppose on a day like today, we're all full of hope. The 100 days that Will mentioned is critical. In British politics, if you're not going forward, you're going backwards. There are 250 Labour MPs who are going to be on the back benches, and they will be watching the Labour front bench like hawks. Unlike sort of knights of the squires of the Tory backbenchers who are unideological and passive, Labour backbenchers are ideological and committed and passionate. They will want to see change. They will want to see the change that Femi has enunciated there. Unless that happens, I fear there will be a fisparious splitting going on. And I particularly want to refer to one particular issue, and that is Europe. Let us be honest about it. Step by step, piece by piece, getting closer to the European Union is not going to set any fires alight. It's not going to actually deal with the chief problem that we have in this country, which is our trade relations with the European Union effectively being decimated. Yeah. So the question of the single market customs union, at the very least, will be brought up by Stella Creasy's Labour Group for Europe, which is represented by 100 members of parliament. And this could cause trouble. One job lost, one factory closed, and the future can be put down to fix it. So consequently, it will require Keir Starmer to be a statesman of epic quality, actually. And if he rises to the challenge, then he will, as Will says, be a seminal prime minister. But he has his work cut out. And I'll just want to say one more thing, if I may. This landslide is wide, but it's not deep. This is a protest vote, as Will said, the Conservative. If we have a scenario where there are mistakes, there is no growth, there are splits developing on the Labour Party's backbenches, that's going to enable the Conservative Party in whatever capacity to regroup. There is a huge centre ground that Keir Starmer can now occupy. He could, as Femi say, just get on with it in this next 100 days. There is no opposition at the moment. He won't do that. And if you don't tackle the serious problems head on in your first or your honeymoon period, then those problems are only going to get worse. And so this is a real test of leadership coming up now.
Femi, I see you agree. Will Hutton, though, let me come back to you, because I do want, for the sake of a very international audience that we have, let's look again at, well, for example, Gaza as far as foreign policy is concerned. The relationship with Israel is increasingly, it's important and symbolic. And because of these troubles, with the relationship with the European Union, we saw under the Tories, the UK move ever closer kind of to the US to see if they could build stronger trade policy, a stronger relationship there. If the US turns back to its conservative government and a very pro-Israel, extreme rather, stance under potentially Donald Trump, where will that leave Keir Starmer and the Labour Party as far as foreign policy is concerned, especially when it comes to Israel?
Opinion is moving in the Labour Party, and it's moving in Keir Starmer's head, actually, in my view. It's also moving in Israel. I mean, when the Israeli Defense Force are themselves kind of want to cease fire, but they don't want to fight on three fronts, Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank, and Netanyahu is increasingly isolated, it becomes kind of politically much easier for Starmer to do what's kind of what his base wants him to do, and which I think he's more inclined to do now than he was when kind of the dreadful atrocities were kind of first broke over Israel. That's to say, I mean, in the Labour Party manifesto, for the first time, there's a kind of commitment to recognise to go beyond just talking about a two-state solution, but to say Britain will recognise a Palestinian state. Timing to be decided, but we'll recognise a Palestinian state. And so that inevitably puts in terms of domestic Israeli politics, that puts kind of the Labour Party in the same wing as the Israeli Labour Party. And those forces. So this is not a slam dunk, and I think that he'd be more anxious to reach out to European powers and other powers in the Middle East that wants this kind of settlement than to kind of side with Donald Trump. Okay. So I think Starmer can be quite a distinct figure, I think, in this.
Femi, I'm not sure you agree if I'm reading your facial expressions correctly. So go ahead, and what you think of the UK policy, what would be on Ukraine, which is another fundamental foreign policy issue. Go ahead.
So, well, for starters, on Ukraine, I imagine that not much will change. While there has been a degree of waning in the general support for Ukraine as the years have dragged on, I think more or less there will still be that base support there. I just wanted to pick up on the idea that Starmer has very much aligned with Palestine, turned his back on Netanyahu. The ceasefire that he called for a few months back, that was a ceasefire that didn't expect Israel to stop bombing Gaza unless they got the hostages back, which is essentially the same line that the Israeli government has been putting out themselves, or will only stop if we get the hostages back. And he needs to go a lot further further than simply recognizing the state of Palestine, stop sending Israel the weapons they're using to commit genocide for starters. And if he doesn't do that, if he doesn't actually stop selling those weapons, then he's going to have a major issue within the backbenches of his party, because he knows that a lot of his base are not okay with our complicity in this situation.
Okay.
I mean, he's in that place already. I think he's in that place already. I mean, now he can read the runes. They've lost 3 seats to independents on this issue. One of them, Shadow Paymaster General Johnny Ashworth. I mean, I think it's he knows where the bulk of his MPs are at. David Lammy has spoken, has kind of lent into this case much more in the last kind of 10 weeks than beforehand. I mean, opinion is moving, and it's also moving in the United States. It's moving in Europe. I mean, it's also moving in fairness, kind of in Israel. So, I mean, this is not, I mean,
Okay.
the vast disproportionality of the Israeli response and Netanyahu's refusal to kind of talk about what a kind of post-war settlement would look like is enraging almost everybody, including large sections in Israel.
Will Hutton, I'm going to have to interrupt it there. Very unfortunately, we are completely out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. So I'd like to thank all 3 of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.